What are some very creepy facts? 1. There is a rare psychiatric disorder called Capgras delusion, in which a person believes that their family members or close friends have been replaced by identical imposters. There is one part of your brain that recognizes faces, and another part that stores the emotions and memories associated with a person. In a normally functioning brain, when you see someone you recognize, the facial recognition system activates and then connects to the emotional memory system, giving you the feeling of familiarity. In Capgras delusion, facial recognition still works. However, the emotional connection does not activate properly. So when you see someone you know and love, they look correct, but they do not feel right. The brain tries to resolve this mismatch by concluding that the person must be an imposter or a duplicate. You can imagine the paranoia that would result if suddenly every important person in your life felt slightly wrong, and your mind tried to explain it by assuming they had been replaced. 2. There was a case involving a college student who was in an accident while on vacation. While he was hospitalized, he spoke normally with his parents on the telephone. He recognized their voices and had regular conversations. When his parents arrived in person, he became extremely distressed because he did not visually recognize them as his parents. At one point, a doctor or nurse asked the parents to stand outside the room and speak to him. Everything was normal again. He responded calmly and recognized them. The moment they entered his sight, the fear returned. His auditory recognition was intact. His visual emotional recognition was not. 3. Scar tissue does not simply form and then remain unchanged. It is part of a continuous biological process involving collagen production and remodeling. If a person develops scurvy, which is caused by severe vitamin C deficiency, collagen synthesis becomes impaired. Without proper collagen production, old scar tissue can weaken and, in extreme cases, reopen. 4. Not every scar is visible on the outside of your body. Internal scar tissue, known as adhesions, can form after surgery, infection, or injury. These internal scars can remain unnoticed for years and later cause pain or medical complications. 5. My mother was hospitalized several years ago due to unexplained abdominal pain. It was later determined that the cause was scar tissue from her cesarean section during my birth. I am now in my 40s. She recovered after minor treatment. I jokingly told her that if she ever died, I would list the cause of death in her obituary as complications from childbirth. 6. This may explain why in older historical accounts, soldiers returning from war sometimes experienced wounds reopening years later. At the time, this phenomenon was poorly understood. Today we know that scar tissue can remain biologically active and vulnerable under certain conditions. 7. A tattoo remains visible because of a permanent immune system response. 8. Tattooing consists of solid pigment particles suspended in liquid, injected approximately 2 millimeters below the surface of the skin. The body recognizes the pigment as a foreign substance. White blood cells, particularly macrophages, attempt to engulf and remove it. However, the pigment particles are often too large to be fully broken down. As a result, immune cells trap the pigment and remain in place. Over time, some pigment particles slowly migrate, which is why tattoos can blur or spread slightly. Different ink colors fade at different rates depending on molecular structure and exposure to ultraviolet light. Orange and yellow pigments tend to degrade more quickly. During laser tattoo removal, the laser breaks the pigment into smaller fragments. These fragments can then be carried away and processed by the body's lymphatic system. 9. The intestines are arranged in a specific anatomical configuration within the abdominal cavity. During surgery, when the intestines are temporarily moved, they tend to settle back into their natural arrangement due to their mesenteric attachments and spatial organization. If displaced, they will gradually reposition themselves into a stable configuration that fits within the available space. 10. This is why during surgery, surgeons can reposition the intestines back into the abdominal cavity, and the body will adapt and stabilize them. This has been observed repeatedly in both human and veterinary medicine. 11. My mother once had surgery, and the doctor told her that he repositioned her intestines back into place and closed the incision. He was not exaggerating. 12. After my second vaginal birth, without pain relief, I remember that standing up felt unusual. It felt as though my internal organs were adjusting to a new spatial arrangement. Breathing felt different, almost as if there was more internal space available. My body seemed to instinctively tense or contract, as if trying to readjust to the sudden change. 13. Human remains from soldiers who died during World War I are still being discovered today. Large areas of Europe, particularly in former battle zones, contain unexploded ordnance and chemical contamination. More than 100 years later, some regions remain dangerous and restricted for construction or farming. 14. If you sit in complete darkness and silence for an extended period, your brain may begin to generate sensory experiences on its own. This phenomenon is known as sensory deprivation hallucination. In the absence of external stimuli, the brain can produce sounds, visual distortions, or the sensation of a presence nearby. 15. The human brain can recognize a face in approximately 13 milliseconds, which is significantly faster than conscious thought. Because of this rapid pattern recognition, the brain may interpret random shadows or patterns as faces, especially in low-light conditions. 16. The difficulty, however, is that while the brain can recognize a face almost instantly, recalling the person's name may take much longer. 17. The word creepy originally described physical sensations, such as insects crawling on the skin, in the early 19th century. Over time, it evolved into a psychological term. According to psychologist Frank McAndrew, creepiness is closely linked to the uncertainty of threat. 18. The Colombian serial killer Pedro Alonso Lopez, known as the Monster of the Andes, confessed to the rape and murder of hundreds of young girls across Ecuador, Peru, and Colombia. He was imprisoned and later transferred to a psychiatric facility. After approximately 18 years, he was declared legally sane and released in 1998. Since his release, his whereabouts have remained unknown. He is considered one of the most prolific confessed serial killers in recorded history. 19. Fatal familial insomnia is an extremely rare inherited prion disease. It typically begins in midlife and progressively destroys the brain's ability to regulate sleep. The condition advances from mild insomnia to total inability to sleep. As the disease progresses, patients experience hallucinations, cognitive decline, autonomic dysfunction, and eventually death. There is currently no cure. 20. The human brain is capable of creating false memories that feel entirely real. Memory is reconstructive, not a perfect recording. Each time you recall an event, the memory can be subtly altered, sometimes introducing details that never actually occurred. 21. Chainsaws were originally developed in the 18th century as medical instruments to assist with difficult childbirth procedures, particularly to widen the pelvic bone during obstructed labor. The early versions were much smaller and manually operated. 22. According to Einstein's theory of relativity, time is not constant. The faster you move through space, the slower you move through time relative to someone who is stationary. This effect is called time dilation. Astronauts aboard the International Space Station age very slightly slower than people on Earth. Photons, which travel at the speed of light, do not experience time in the conventional sense. 23. If you have tinnitus, the perception of ringing or noise in the ears, the sound is generated by neural activity within the auditory system. Even if a person loses their hearing, the internal neural signal can persist, meaning true silence may never be experienced again. 24. Approximately 95% of Australia's landmass is sparsely populated or uninhabited. Because of the vast and remote terrain, experts have suggested that undetected crimes could occur in isolated areas without being discovered for long periods. 25. Law enforcement agencies in Australia's Northern Territory have dozens of unidentified human remains in their records. Historically, when searching for missing persons in remote regions, unrelated remains were sometimes discovered. Not all cases involve foul play. Many deaths are due to accidents, exposure, or getting lost in harsh environments. 26. Statistically, there is likely someone who remembers you for something you do not even remember doing. You may exist in someone else's life story as a hero, a stranger, or even a villain, without ever knowing. 27. A person once described struggling with luggage and a young child at a train station. A uniformed woman helped her reach her train, even though she was late for her own. Months later, she discovered that the same woman was a train driver. She later contacted the employer to pass along her gratitude. Sometimes a small act of kindness permanently changes how someone sees the world. 28. The concept of eternity is difficult for the human mind to comprehend. The idea of existence without end, whether in a religious or purely abstract sense, exceeds normal cognitive limits. The human brain evolved to understand survival, not infinity. 35. A standard deck of playing cards can be arranged in 52 factorial possible orders. That number is approximately 8.07 multiplied by 10 to the power of 67. This number exceeds the estimated number of atoms in the Milky Way galaxy. A thoroughly shuffled deck of cards is extremely likely to be in an order that has never existed before in human history. 36. The tarantula hawk wasp is a species that hunts tarantulas. It paralyzes the spider and lays an egg inside or on it. The spider remains alive but immobilized. When the larva hatches, it consumes the host gradually. 37. The human body contains trillions of microorganisms. Current research suggests that microbial cells are roughly comparable in number to human cells, rather than vastly outnumbering them as once believed. 38. During the siege of Sarajevo from 1992 to 1996, civilians were targeted by sniper fire from surrounding hills. There have been reports alleging that some foreign individuals traveled to the region during the conflict. However, historical documentation varies, and not all claims have been conclusively verified. 39. Many laugh tracks used in television shows were recorded decades ago. The people whose laughter you hear may no longer be alive. The sound of laughter in older shows may come from recordings made in the mid-20th century. 40. Hidden surveillance cameras can be manufactured to resemble everyday objects such as pens, chargers, or cups. Such devices are commercially available in many regions, often marketed for security purposes. 41. Statistically, in several countries, including the United States, homicide is one of the leading causes of death for pregnant women, often involving an intimate partner. 42. It is possible that someone who follows your social media accounts may know detailed aspects of your daily life. You may walk past that person without realizing how much they know about you. 43. John Tyler, the 10th President of the United States, was born in 1790. Because he and his son both fathered children at advanced ages, a grandson of John Tyler was alive in the 21st century. This means that in just 3 generations, that family line spanned nearly the entire history of the United States presidency. 44. In the 1950s at Johns Hopkins Hospital, cancer cells were taken from a patient named Henrietta Lacks without her informed consent. These cells became known as the HeLa cell line. They were the first human cells successfully grown indefinitely in laboratory conditions. Her cells have contributed to major medical breakthroughs and have been cultivated in enormous quantities worldwide. 45. There are ongoing public discussions and speculation about unreleased documents related to Jeffrey Epstein. However, claims about their contents remain speculative unless supported by verified evidence. 46. Some research in personality psychology suggests that certain traits associated with corporate leadership and certain traits observed in criminal psychopathy can overlap, such as high risk tolerance or reduced empathy. However, this does not imply equivalence between the two groups. 47. Some parents of newborns report hearing phantom cries, a type of auditory hallucination. The brain remains hyperalert to infant distress signals, sometimes generating perceived sounds even in silence. 48. Studies examining microplastics in human tissues have found microscopic plastic particles in various organs. Researchers often struggle to find individuals with zero detectable exposure, reflecting how widespread environmental contamination has become. 49. When large-scale wealth concentration is discussed, people sometimes find conspiracy theories more believable because economic inequality can create perceptions of hidden influence. However, plausibility does not equal proof. 50. James Sligo Jameson, associated with the naming of certain bird species, was reportedly involved in a deeply disturbing incident during an expedition in the Congo in the 19th century, according to historical accounts. 51. Statistically, homicide victims are more likely to know their attacker than to be killed by a stranger. 52. Many animals classified as herbivores are technically omnivorous under certain conditions. Horses, deer, goats, and even rabbits have been observed consuming meat or bone, particularly when seeking minerals such as calcium. 53. Domesticated animals, even small pets, retain instinctive behaviors. A rabbit that appears harmless can display territorial aggression. 54. If an only child does not have children, that specific genetic line ends with them. Every direct ancestor for hundreds of millions of years successfully reproduced. That chain can stop within a single generation. 55. The same principle applies universally. Genetic continuity depends entirely on reproduction in each generation. 56. Statistically speaking, the chain of events that will eventually lead to your death is already unfolding in some form. Causality operates continuously, even if outcomes are unknown. 57. Marketing, propaganda, and persuasive messaging significantly shape human perception and desire. When information is incomplete or manipulated, people may adopt beliefs that feel self-generated but are externally influenced. 58. In the United States, homicide clearance rates have declined compared to previous decades. This means a substantial percentage of murders remain unsolved. 59. Some modern devices from companies such as Lenovo and Apple use human presence detection systems. These systems rely on sensors, infrared detection, or camera-based technologies to determine whether an authorized user is nearby. While designed for security and convenience, constant environmental scanning can feel unsettling to some users. 60. Commercial aviation is statistically far safer than automobile travel. For airline travel in the United States to match the fatality rate of car travel, there would need to be multiple large passenger aircraft crashes every single day. Despite this, people often perceive driving as safer because it feels familiar and controllable. 61. Human memory is reconstructive rather than perfectly archival. Each time you recall an event, your brain rebuilds it using fragments of stored information. Confident memories are not necessarily accurate. People can sincerely believe events occurred differently than they actually did. Even lie detector tests measure physiological stress, not objective truth. Your strongest memories may be partially fictional constructions created by your own mind.